High in the gray mountains, there stood the town of Stonetop. It was a town built from practicality, carved from the very quarry that gave it purpose. The buildings were gray stone, the streets were gray stone, and it often seemed the hearts of the people were made of the same unyielding material. Stonetop was a town of measurements. Everything had a purpose, a weight, a price. A bag of grain had value, a block of marble had value, a strong back had value. And then there was Elias. Elias was a painter in a town that had no use for pictures. His small studio, tucked away in a dusty alley, was a pocket of impossible color in a world of gray. But even his colors were wrong. He didn't paint portraits of the wealthy merchants or grand landscapes of the quarry. His canvases were filled with feelings. On one wall, a canvas blazed with chaotic, furious reds and oranges. The title, written in small charcoal, read, "A Moment of Rage." On another, a canvas of the deepest, most peaceful indigo, titled, "The Sound of a Lullaby I Almost Remember." The people of Stonetop, when they bothered to look in, would shake their heads, tapping their foreheads. "A waste of good canvas," they'd mutter. "What is the use of painting a sound?" The town was governed by Lord Governor Boren. Boren was the living embodiment of Stonetop. He was a mountain of a man, with a beard like iron filings and hands that had personally measured every stone in the town hall. He believed in ledgers, in scales, in hammers, and in facts. To him, if you cannot weigh it, measure it, or build with it, it is not real. He tolerated Elias, but only as one tolerates a harmless insect. Elias had only one true friend in all of Stonetop. Her name was Lyra. Lyra had lived in the town since she was a child, and she had never once seen the gray stone of its walls or the impossible colors in Elias's studio. Lyra was blind. Her world was one of texture, sound, and feeling. She was perhaps the only person in Stonetop who truly understood Elias's work. She would visit his studio, running her delicate fingers over his canvases. She'd touch the thick, angry paint of rage and pull her hand back. "Too loud today, Elias," she'd laugh. Then she'd move to the indigo canvas, her fingers tracing the smooth, cool strokes. This one feels like home. You were thinking of your mother when you painted this, weren't you?" Elias would just nod, astonished, as always, at her perception. "How do you do that, Lyra?" "I don't look," she'd say simply, her unseeing eyes turned toward the window. "I feel." One cold, gray morning, Elias met Lyra in the town square. His face was pale, his eyes bright with a terrifying, exhilarating new idea. "I'm going to do it, Lyra. I've been practicing. I've painted silence. I've painted warmth. Now I'm going to paint the master of it all." "Paint what, Elias?" she asked, clutching his arm as he guided her over the cobblestones. "I am going to paint the wind." His declaration, made later that day in the market to secure funds for a larger than normal canvas, was met with a new level of scorn. It reached Governor Boren, who, for the first time, saw Elias not as a fool, but as a potential problem. He stormed into the square, his heavy boots echoing. "Paint the wind?" Boren's voice boomed, silencing the market. "The air? Boy, have you finally lost your mind? The wind is a nuisance that breaks our shutters. It is not a thing. It has no color, no weight, It cannot be built with. You are wasting time, wasting paint, and worse, you are planting useless, fanciful ideas in people's heads. Stonetop is a town of work." "But, Governor, it is the most real thing of all. It moves everything. It brings the rain. It clears the dust. It breathes. How can we say it is not real?" Boren pointed a thick finger at him. "Here is what is real, painter. The stone I stand on, the gold in my pocket, the hammer that built this town. You will paint no wind. You will paint my portrait, for which I will pay you fairly, or you will paint nothing at all." I cannot paint you, sir," Elias whispered. "Then you will starve," Boren declared, and turned his back. The crowd dispersed, shaking their heads. Later, in his studio, Elias stared at his empty canvas. "Maybe he's right, Lyra," he sighed, slumping onto a stool. Lyra was sitting by the window, her face tilted up. A small breeze, the very subject of their debate, ruffled her hair. She smiled. "He's wrong, Elias. He's not looking hard enough." "But how, Lyra? How do I start?" "Don't start by looking," she said, her voice soft. "Start by listening. Go to the high peaks. I will wait for you." For the next 6 months, Elias became a ghost in Stonetop. He took Lyra's advice. He abandoned his studio and climbed to the highest, most windswept peaks above the quarry. His first quest was to see the wind. He reasoned that if he could see what it did, he could capture its essence. He sat for weeks, his fingers numb with cold, sketching. He drew the long, graceful curve of the grass bending in the meadows. He drew the precise, intricate dance of 1,000 leaves in an aspen grove. He drew the powerful, surging shapes of clouds as they were herded across the sky. He drew the ripples on the surface of a mountain lake, a perfect, fleeting map of the currents above. He brought the sketches back to his studio and began to paint. He worked with a feverish intensity. He painted great, sweeping landscapes, all defined by the invisible force that shaped them. The paintings were beautiful. Technically, they were the finest work he had ever done. The merchants in town even offered to buy them. "Ah, a painting of a field," one said, relieved. "Now that has value." But Elias refused to sell. He knew they were failures. He brought Lyra to the studio. She ran her hands over the canvases. They were covered in smooth, flowing strokes. "They are beautiful, Elias," she said. "The grass is so soft. The clouds are like pillows." She paused, her head tilted. "But where is the wind?" "It's right there," Elias said, frustrated. "It's in the way the grass is bent. It's in the movement of the clouds." Lyra shook her head, her hand resting on the painting of the field. "No, this is a painting of grass. It is a painting of what the wind does. It's a picture of an aftermath. It's a footprint. You've painted the footprint, Elias, not the creature itself. This painting is silent." Elias, though downhearted, was not broken. He had failed to see the wind. Now he would try to hear it. He sold some of his old canvases for supplies, much to the approval of Governor Boren, who saw it as a sign of returning sanity. But Elias did not buy bread. He bought thick, dark, angry pigments, deep blues, violent purples, sharp grays. He returned to the mountains. This time he did not look. He found a cave on a sheer cliff face, a place the wind howled through like a banshee. He sat in the dark, his eyes bound with a cloth. He listened. He listened to the high-pitched shriek as it tore through the rocks, the low moan as it filled the valley, the sudden, violent thump of a gust hitting the cave wall. He heard the wind's anger, its sorrow, its wild, untamable voice. He returned to his studio, his ears ringing. He attacked his canvases. He threw paint. He scratched at it with his fingernails. He used his palette knife like a weapon. The paintings were chaotic, violent, and loud. They were abstract swirls of dark, clashing colors. They were visual representations of noise. When he was done, he felt exhausted but triumphant. He brought Lyra to see them. She stepped into the studio and immediately put a hand to her temple. "Elias," she said, her voice strained. "What is this? It's so loud. It hurts." "It's the wind," he said, his voice high with excitement. "It's the sound. It's the howl." Lyra reached out and touched one of the new paintings. The paint was thick, jagged, and sharp. "Yes," she said, pulling her hand back. "This is the wind's scream. This is its voice." She turned her face to him, her expression one of deep sadness. "But where is its breath? Where is the part that gives life? This is a painting of its rage. But the wind is more than just rage. This is still not it." Elias looked from Lyra's pained face to his angry, chaotic canvases. She was right. He had painted its footprint. He had painted its scream, but he had not painted the wind. He sank to the floor, surrounded by his failures, and for the first time, he truly wept. It was then that the stillness came to Stonetop. It began subtly. A miner in the quarry noticed his pickaxe felt heavier. A mother noticed the laundry on her line hung limp for 3 days straight. Then the realization dawned on them all, like a slow, suffocating blanket. The wind had stopped. Not just a calm day, it had stopped. The air in the high-altitude town, usually crisp and clear, became thick. The massive amounts of dust from the quarry, with no wind to carry it away, began to hang in the air. A permanent gray-brown fog descended upon Stonetop, obscuring the sun, choking the sky. The air became stale. Within a week, the cogs of the town's pragmatic economy ground to a halt. The great windmills that ground the grain stood motionless. The grain ships, which relied on the valley's crosswinds, sat motionless in the distant fjord, their sails hanging like funeral shrouds. Within 2 weeks, the fog was so thick that visibility was reduced to a few feet. A dry, hacking cough spread through the populace. The stone dust, once a simple nuisance, was now a deadly airborne poison. The old and the young began to sicken. Governor Boren, facing a crisis that defied his ledgers, did the only thing he knew. He applied logic and force. "If the wind will not blow," he bellowed in the town square, his voice muffled by the fog, "we will make it blow." He commissioned the town's blacksmiths to build gigantic mechanical fans, powered by the town's draft horses, walking in endless, weary circles. The machines were marvels of engineering. They were loud, they were impressive, and they were a catastrophic failure. The massive blades churned the thick, dusty air, but did not move it. They simply whipped the heavy, particulate-filled fog into a frenzy, driving the dust deeper into lungs, into houses, into everything.
The air became less breathable. The coughing grew worse. Lyra, with her delicate constitution, was one of the first to fall gravely ill. Her soft, clear voice became a dry, painful rasp. Elias sat by her bedside in the small, clean room her family kept for her, holding her hand, listening to her labored breathing. The stillness was no longer a philosophical problem. It was a monster at her door. Boren himself, his face grim, visited her. He looked at the pale, sightless girl who was suffocating in his perfectly logical town. His mechanics had failed. His ledgers were useless. He looked at Elias, who sat by her bed, useless as ever, and felt a surge of pure, desperate rage. "This is your fault," he snarled, his voice low. "You and your fantasies. You angered the elements, you wasted time on air, and now air is what is killing us." Elias just looked up, his eyes hollow with grief, too tired to even argue. Defeated, Elias returned to his studio. It was the only place the dust hadn't fully conquered, his canvases acting as accidental filters. He sat on the floor, surrounded by his two great failures, the silent, beautiful footprints of the wind and the loud, angry screams of the wind. He was a failure. Boren was right. His art was useless. It could not save Lyra. It could not clear the air. He had tried to see. He had tried to hear. He had tried, with all his human arrogance, to capture a god. He picked up a piece of charcoal, his hand shaking from hunger and despair. He looked at a small blank piece of parchment. He had no energy to paint. He could only draw. He closed his eyes, not in meditation, but in surrender. He gave up. And in that darkness, in that total surrender, something stirred. He was no longer trying to catch the wind. He was simply remembering. He remembered a day, years ago, flying a kite with Lyra. He remembered the feel of the string in his hand, a living, joyful pull. He remembered Lyra's laughter as the kite soared into a sky she could not see. He remembered her face, tilted up to the sun, and how she had described the feeling. It feels like the sky is pulling me up, Elias. It feels like hope." He remembered the cool relief of a breeze on a hot summer day in the quarry, a gift from nowhere. He remembered the feeling of taking a deep, clean breath after a rainstorm, a feeling of renewal. His eyes snapped open. His charcoal-covered hand was trembling. He looked at the parchment. He had been drawing, unconsciously. It was not a field, not a cloud, not a chaotic scribble. It was a single, perfect, ascending spiral. A line filled with energy, with life, with a feeling. "It's not an object," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "It's not a sound." He looked at his wall of failures. "It's not an it at all." He stumbled out of his studio and ran through the choking fog to Lyra's bedside. Her breathing was shallow. "Lyra," he said, his voice urgent. "Lyra, I was wrong. I've been trying to paint a thing, but the wind isn't a thing. It's a feeling." She turned her head, her breath a painful rattle. What feeling, Elias?" "It's the feeling of change. It's the feeling of a new beginning. It's the promise that nothing is stuck forever. It's the pull of the kite. It's Lyra. It's hope." Her fingers tightened weakly around his. A small, faint smile touched her cracked lips. "Well, then, go paint that." Her father guided her to the painting. The crowd watched, silent. Lyra, the girl who could not see, was the first to judge the masterpiece. She reached out her hands, not to the canvas, but just in front of it, as if feeling the warmth of a fire. She inhaled, a sharp, sudden breath. Her eyes, usually clouded, widened, A real, true smile spread across her face. "Oh," she breathed, a single tear rolling down her dusty cheek. "Oh, Elias, it's beautiful. It's so fresh. I can feel it. I can breathe." She took another breath, deeper this time. A few other people watching her unconsciously took a deep breath as well. A small child, coughing moments before, pointed at the painting. It's moving," he said. It wasn't, of course, not physically, but Lyra's faith, her pure, unseeing belief was the spark. The crowd, starved for anything to believe in, looked at the painting and chose to see what Lyra felt. They looked at the vibrant, ascending colors, and for a moment, they remembered what a clean sky looked like. They remembered what a fresh breeze felt like. They remembered hope. A collective sigh, a breath of shared belief, passed through the crowd. And as if summoned by that very belief, from the highest peak of the Gray Mountains, a single, solitary flag on the watchtower fluttered. A man pointed, his voice breaking. "Look! The flag! The flag!" A whisper of cool, clean air touched the square. It was so faint, it was barely there, but it was real. It moved Lyra's hair. It stirred the dust at Bourne's feet. And then another, stronger gust came, and another. The heavy, suffocating fog began to tear. It began to rise. It began to move. Within an hour, a steady, life-giving wind was sweeping through the streets of Stonetop, carrying the poison of the quarry dust out of the valley. The sun, a perfect golden circle, broke through the clearing clouds. The people wept, they laughed, they danced, they turned their faces upwards and simply breathed. Governor Boren stood alone, staring at the painting. His entire world of measurements and logic had crumbled. He looked at Elias, who was holding Lyra's hand, both of them crying with relief. Boren did not apologize. It was not his way. But he walked over, his heavy boots slow, and stood before the canvas. He looked at it for a long, long time. Elias never became a rich man. He never painted a governor's portrait, but his painting was never moved. It stayed in the center of Stonetop, a permanent, vibrant reminder. The town was still a town of stone, still a town of work, but it was no longer just a town of facts. They still weighed their gold and measured their marble, but they had also learned that the most valuable things in life, hope, faith, change, and the wind that brings them, are the things that can never, ever be held and can only be felt.
A new energy surged through Elias. He didn't run back to his studio. He walked. He walked with a purpose he had never felt before. He was no longer a man trying to prove something. He was a man with a message. He took his last, largest canvas. He took his last pigments, not the angry darks, not the passive landscapes, but the colors of life. A brilliant, light-filled blue, a vibrant, new leaf green, a warm, energetic white, and a single, pure drop of sunrise yellow. He stood before the canvas, and for the first time, he closed his eyes. He did not look at a model. He did not listen to the outside world. He looked inward. He remembered Lyra's hand in his. He remembered the feeling of hope. He began to paint. He painted not with his eyes, but with his soul. He painted the sensation of a deep breath. He painted the joy of a kite pulling upwards. He painted the promise of a clearing sky. The painting was a whirlwind of abstract, joyful, ascending energy.
It was a vortex of pure, unbridled hope. It was a painting of a feeling. It was, at last, his painting of the wind. He worked for hours. When he finished, he was shaking, exhausted, but at peace. He did not wait for it to dry. He carried the wet, vibrant canvas out of his studio and into the dead, gray, silent town square. A crowd of sick, desperate townsfolk gathered. Boren was there, his face a mask of gray dust and failure. He saw Elias and his ridiculous, colorful painting, and a final bitter laugh escaped him. "This is your answer, painter?" Boren's voice was a low growl of contempt. "A splotch of paint. We are suffocating, and you bring us a decoration?" "It is not a decoration, Governor," Elias said, his voice quiet but clear. He placed the large canvas on the town's central fountain, which had long since dried up. "A reminder of what?" Boren sneered. "Of hope," Elias said. The crowd murmured. Hope was a word they had not heard in weeks. Just then, Lyra appeared, leaning on her father, her breathing shallow. She had insisted on coming. "Elias," she called out weakly. "I'm here, Lyra. It's here."